Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories, subscribe my YouTube channel. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. I was a freelance systems analyst, accustomed to the ebb and flow of contract work. So, when an email arrived from a company called Unsettling Industries, offering a lucrative position in a city named Nemours, I was intrigued. A quick search yielded nothing. No maps, no references, just a void. The email claimed Nemours was a newly developed tech hub, off the grid for confidentiality. The offer included a substantial salary, relocation assistance, and housing. Despite the red flags, the allure of financial stability was too strong. I accepted. Travel arrangements were made swiftly. A private car picked me up, and after hours of driving through desolate landscapes, we arrived at a city shrouded in mist. The driver handed me a keycard and a note. "Welcome to Nemours. Your new home awaits." He left without a word. The city was eerily silent. Buildings stood tall but lifeless, their windows dark. Streetlights flickered sporadically. I found my assigned apartment, modern, fully furnished, yet devoid of personal touches. A tablet on the table displayed my schedule. Orientation at 9 a.m. The next morning, I navigated the empty streets to the Unsettling Industries building. Inside, a receptionist greeted me with a mechanical smile, guiding me to a conference room. There, a man introduced himself as Mr. Gray, the project manager. He explained that Nemours was a prototype city, designed for advanced AI integration and human adaptability studies. My role was to monitor system performance and report anomalies. As days passed, I noticed peculiarities. The city's inhabitants were few and distant, their interactions minimal. Shadows moved where there should be none. At night, whispers echoed through the halls. My reports on these anomalies were met with reassurances. System calibrations are underway. Reddit. One evening, I attempted to leave the city, only to find every exit looped back to the center. GPS devices malfunctioned, displaying static or nonsensical coordinates. Panic set in. I confronted Mr. Gray, demanding answers. He remained calm, stating, "Nemours is your home now. Embrace it." Realization dawned. I was a subject in an elaborate experiment, trapped in a city that defied reality. The boundaries between the artificial and the real blurred. Escape seemed impossible. As I sat in my apartment, the city's hum resonated, almost as if it were alive, watching, waiting. For the first few days, I convinced myself it was just stress. An overactive imagination fed by isolation and endless silence. But the city wouldn't let me rest. The walls of my apartment began to pulse with a faint, rhythmic vibration, like the heartbeat of something alive. It would start in the middle of the night, a low hum resonating through the floorboards and into my bones. The voices came next. At first, they were murmurs, indistinct, like hearing a conversation through thick glass. But last night I heard it clearly. "Ethan, leave now." The voice was soft, almost pleading. But when I tried the front door, it wouldn't budge. The keycard flickered red. The apartment's windows were sealed, the glass too thick to break. Panic clawed at my throat as I slammed my fists against the walls. The next morning, I arrived at work to find Mr. Gray waiting for me in the hallway. His expression was as unreadable as always, but his tone was slightly off. "Ethan, we noticed anomalies in your apartment last night," he said. "Routine maintenance is underway. No need to be alarmed." I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but something in his stare silenced me. It was as though he was looking through me, as though I was the anomaly. That day, I explored more of the city. I wandered down streets that looped impossibly, alleys that led nowhere. The buildings, tall, pristine, and identical, seemed to watch me as I passed. There were others, scattered figures I glimpsed at the edges of my vision, but they always vanished when I tried to approach. I found a library, or what passed for one. The shelves were stocked with books whose covers bore no titles, whose pages were blank. At the center of the room was a terminal, its screen flashing softly. I hesitated, then approached. The terminal's interface was simple, displaying a blinking cursor and the words, "Input query." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. On impulse, I typed, "How do I leave Nemours?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the terminal responded, "There is no outside. There is only Nemours." I staggered back, my mind reeling. As I turned to leave, I noticed a shadow standing in the corner, a tall, thin figure, featureless and utterly still. My breath caught in my throat. When I blinked, it was gone. That night, the whispers intensified. They spoke of escape, of truths buried beneath the city's polished surface. I awoke drenched in sweat, convinced that someone, or something, was standing at the foot of my bed. But when I looked, there was nothing there, only the shadows dancing across the walls. Driven by desperation, I pried open a floor vent in my apartment, hoping to find an exit, a maintenance crawlspace, anything. Instead, I found a thick, pulsating membrane of flesh and machinery, as if the building itself was part biological, part synthetic. The realization sent me reeling. The city wasn't built. It was grown. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The whispers followed me into sleep, telling me to find the heart of Nemours. Only there could I discover the truth. The next morning, a message appeared on my apartment's screen. Report to Central Hub. Orientation phase complete. Integration pending. My hands trembled. I was no longer a guest or an employee. I was part of the system now. And the system wanted me to come closer. The morning after the message appeared, I sat at my apartment's small dining table, staring at the words Report to Central Hub. Orientation phase complete. Integration pending. My pulse raced and a deep, primal fear gnawed at my mind. I hadn't agreed to anything beyond a simple systems analysis job. And yet, it felt as though my very existence was being rewritten. I left the apartment, but this time the air outside felt heavier, thick with an unseen presence. The streets were even emptier than before, and the oppressive silence was punctuated by the faint, rhythmic pulse I'd come to associate with the city itself. It wasn't just the buildings that seemed alive. The very ground beneath my feet vibrated faintly, as though some vast, slumbering entity stirred below. I followed the directions that appeared on my work tablet. The route wound through streets that bent in impossible angles, alleys that narrowed until I could barely squeeze through, and corridors that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Each step brought me deeper into Nemours' underbelly. Eventually, I arrived at a towering structure unlike any I'd seen before. It loomed over the city like a black monolith, its surface smooth and featureless except for a single door at its base. Above the entrance, a faintly glowing sign read, Central Hub. The door slid open silently as I approached, revealing a narrow, dimly lit corridor that led into the depths of the building. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I pressed on, driven by equal parts fear and the need to understand. Inside, the walls pulsed faintly, veins of dim red light coursing through them like blood. The air was colder here, and the faint hum I'd heard before had grown louder, more insistent. As I descended deeper, I noticed changes. The walls became less mechanical and more organic. The hard, metallic surfaces gave way to something that felt almost like muscle, warm and faintly pliant under my fingertips. At the end of the corridor, I found myself in a cavernous chamber, dimly lit by a pulsating glow from the walls and ceiling. The floor beneath me was slick and uneven, covered in a thin membrane that quivered underfoot. In the center of the chamber stood a massive column, covered in a patchwork of flesh and machinery, wires twisting around sinews, screens embedded into the organic surface flickering with unreadable data. I approached cautiously, my breath catching in my throat as I realized the screens were displaying images of me, walking through the city, sitting in my apartment, even sleeping. They'd been watching me. My every move had been recorded. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the chamber. It wasn't coming from a speaker or an intercom but from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the column itself. Integration sequence initiated. Subject Ethan Price. Compliance required. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. No! I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the chamber's oppressive silence. The floor beneath me rippled, and tendrils of fleshy machinery slithered toward my feet. I turned to run, but the tendrils moved faster, wrapping around my ankles and pulling me back toward the column. As I struggled, I realized the screens were shifting, now displaying images of other people, figures I recognized from my fleeting encounters in the city. Their faces were blank, their bodies limp. They weren't residents. They were prisoners. The tendrils tightened, pulling me toward the column's base. Desperation surged through me and I fought harder, kicking and clawing at the encroaching mass. My hand brushed against something sharp, a loose metal panel embedded in the floor. Gripping it, I slashed at the tendrils, slicing through them with a sickening squelch. The column shuddered violently, a deep, guttural groan reverberating through the chamber. The screens flickered wildly and the tendrils recoiled. I seized the opportunity, scrambling to my feet and sprinting toward a narrow passage at the far side of the chamber. The corridor twisted and turned, leading me deeper underground. The walls here were entirely organic, slick with a viscous fluid that clung to my skin and clothing. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in near-total darkness save for the faint, bioluminescent glow emanating from the walls. Ahead, the passage opened into a vast subterranean cavern. At its center was a massive, pulsating mass, a grotesque fusion of flesh, circuitry, and bone. It throbbed with a steady rhythm as though it were the heart of the city itself. Tendrils extended from it, weaving into the walls, ceiling, and floor, connecting every part of Nemours to this central core. I stood transfixed, horrified yet unable to look away. The whispers were louder here, a cacophony of voices overlapping in a maddening chorus. They spoke in fragmented phrases. Trapped, integration. No escape, we were you once. It dawned on me, the city wasn't just alive. It consumed those who entered. Eidolon Industries had lured people here, promising lucrative jobs and new lives, only to feed them to this grotesque entity, merging them into its twisted existence. As I took a hesitant step forward, the heart shuddered violently, and a gaping maw opened at its center. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening scream. I staggered back, but tendrils shot out from the walls, wrapping around my arms and legs, dragging me toward the maw. Desperation clawed at my mind. I remembered the vent in my apartment, the membrane I'd found. It wasn't just part of the building, it was connected to this thing. If I could disrupt its connection, perhaps I could weaken it. With a surge of adrenaline, I tore free from the tendrils and sprinted back through the corridor, retracing my steps. The walls seemed to close in around me, the whispers now laced with anger. I reached the upper levels, back into the city proper, and made my way to my apartment. Inside, the air was stifling, heavy with the scent of decay. The floor beneath the vent pulsed visibly. I grabbed the metal panel I'd used earlier and hacked at the fleshy membrane, cutting deeper and deeper until I reached a thick, coiled mass of veins and wires. I drove the panel into the mass, severing it with a sickening crunch. The building shuddered violently. Alarms blared. The lights flickered and died. I ran to the window, and to my astonishment, the fog that had shrouded the city began to lift, revealing jagged, broken streets and buildings that stretched far beyond what I'd seen. A voice, faint and distant, whispered in my ear, "You're not free yet." The apartment door burst open and shadowy figures poured in, their forms indistinct, shifting like smoke. I bolted for the stairwell, descending into the collapsing structure as the city itself trembled. At the base of the building, I found a hidden passageway that hadn't been there before. An escape route? Or another trap? I didn't have time to consider. The shadows were closing in. I plunged into the darkness, the whispers fading behind me. As I stumbled through the narrow, twisting tunnel, I realized that Nemours wasn't just a city. It was a labyrinth, a living organism designed to trap, consume, and repurpose those who entered. And I had only scratched the surface of its twisted reality. I emerged into a vast underground chamber, illuminated by a faint, sickly light. Before me stood a towering, skeletal figure, its face an amalgam of countless human visages, its eyes hollow and endless. It spoke in a voice that echoed through my very bones. "Welcome to the heart of Nemours. Your transformation begins now." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The skeletal figure before me wasn't just an amalgamation of faces. It was a grotesque tapestry of suffering, each visage silently screaming, their mouths stretched in agony. Their eyes, if you could call them that, were hollowed pits from which a pale, oozing light bled. It reached for me, its elongated fingers tipped with jagged bone, brushing against the air mere inches from my chest. I stumbled back, but the tunnel behind me had already sealed. I was trapped, and the thing knew it. "You are Ethan," it said, but its voice was not singular. It was a symphony of overlapping whispers, each carrying the weight of untold misery. "You were chosen. You have seen the truth." "No," I croaked, my throat dry and my mind reeling. "I didn't choose this. I want out." A low, resonant hum filled the chamber as the figures' faces twisted into something resembling amusement. "No one leaves Nemours. You are already part of us. But the integration must be completed." I wanted to run, but the floor shifted beneath me, becoming semi-liquid, pulling me toward the towering figure. My legs sank ankle-deep into the viscous surface as the walls of the chamber began to pulse in rhythm with a deafening heartbeat. The lights overhead dimmed and brightened with each pulse, illuminating veins and arteries that ran through the walls like grotesque architecture. "Integration." I rasped, trying to resist the pull. "What does that mean?" "It means surrender," the thing whispered. "It means shedding your skin, your mind, your will. You will become like us. Like the others." Behind the creature, more figures emerged from the walls, faceless forms shrouded in shivering shadows. I recognized them as the people I had glimpsed in the city. They weren't living, they were Absorbed, hollow shells now animated by the will of Nemoris. They reached toward me, their movements slow, deliberate, as though underwater. Panic clawed at my chest, but I couldn't stop the pull. The floor sucked at my legs, pulling me deeper, up to my knees, then my waist. The tendrils of fleshy material wrapped around my arms, pinning them to my sides. I was sinking, being consumed, my body turning numb as the pulse intensified. In the moments before my head slipped beneath the surface, I heard a faint voice, one I hadn't heard before. It wasn't the chorus of Nemoris but something softer, clearer, human. "Ethan, fight it. You're not alone." The voice was familiar. I gasped, realizing it was Claire's, the girl from the train station, the one who had vanished before I ever spoke to her. My vision darkened, and for a heartbeat, I felt my consciousness slipping away into the depths of the living city. Then a surge of defiance erupted in me. I twisted violently, wrenching my arms free from the tendrils. The membrane clinging to my skin tore with a sickening rip, and I clawed my way upward. My hands found purchase on a jagged outcropping of bone that jutted from the floor, and I heaved myself free from the consuming mass. The skeletal figure roared, a sound not of anger but of frustration, its many faces contorting in a symphony of rage. "You cannot leave," it shrieked. "You are already one with us." But I was already scrambling for the far side of the chamber, where a narrow fissure had appeared in the wall, faintly illuminated by a sickly green glow. The walls trembled, and the heartbeat grew erratic, as though my resistance was destabilizing something fundamental within Nemoris. I forced myself through the crack, scraping my skin against rough, bone-like edges. Beyond it lay a tunnel unlike any I had seen before. This one wasn't lined with veins or flesh but instead with raw stone, as though I had broken through the city's facade and into something older, more primal. The air here was colder, sharp with the scent of minerals and dust, and the oppressive pulse of Nemoris was muffled, distant. I didn't stop running. I stumbled through the darkness, deeper into the cavernous tunnel, until I collapsed against a stone wall, gasping for breath. The only sound was the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance and the fading echo of the city's heartbeat. After what felt like hours, I gathered the courage to move again. The tunnel led downward, spiraling like a great throat, deeper and deeper beneath the city. My flashlight flickered back to life, casting eerie shadows on the uneven walls. Strange symbols were etched into the stone, some resembling runes, others grotesque depictions of twisted, unrecognizable creatures. The further I went, the clearer my mind became. It was as though the deeper I descended, the weaker Nemoris's influence grew. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I whirled around, brandishing the metal shard I'd carried since the chamber. A figure stepped out of the shadows, a young woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. It was Claire. "You found me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I knew you would." "Claire, how are you here?" I stammered. "I've been trapped longer than you," she said. "I tried to fight but it nearly consumed me. I found this tunnel, it's a way out. Or at least, it's supposed to be." "What is this place?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Nemoris isn't a city," she said softly. "It's a living organism, a parasite. It lures people in with promises, absorbs them, and uses them to expand itself. The company, Unsettling Industries, is just a front. They feed it with new bodies, new minds." I shivered, bile rising in my throat. "Then this tunnel? It leads to the root," she said. "The true core of Nemoris. If we destroy it, we might break its hold. It's our only chance." I nodded, too exhausted and terrified to argue. Together we continued down the spiral tunnel, the air growing colder and thinner. Strange, faint lights danced along the walls, and the ground beneath us felt brittle, as though it could collapse at any moment. At the bottom of the tunnel, we entered a vast, natural cavern. In the center was a pulsating mass, far larger than the one I had seen before. It resembled a massive, nightmarish heart, its surface slick with moisture, covered in jagged, crystalline growths that shimmered with sickly green light. This was the root, the true core of Nemoris. Claire reached into her jacket and produced a small device, something she must have smuggled in from the surface. It was crude but effective, a shaped explosive charge, its blinking red light casting eerie shadows across her face. "If we set this here," she said, "it might disrupt the core long enough to collapse the tunnels and sever Nemoris's link to the surface. But we have to move fast. Once it's armed, we'll have minutes at best." I hesitated. "And what if it doesn't work?" She met my gaze, her expression grim. "Then we're dead. But at least we won't be part of it." Together we approached the route. The tendrils writhed as if sensing our intent, but here at the very core they were weaker, slower. Claire affixed the charge to a crystalline outgrowth and activated it. The device began to emit a high-pitched whine, and its light turned from red to an ominous green. "We have to run," she said. We turned and sprinted back through the tunnel. Behind us, the ground trembled violently, and a deep, guttural roar echoed through the cavern as the root shuddered and began to collapse. Chunks of stone and flesh rained from the ceiling, and the walls cracked and crumbled. We ran, driven by sheer terror as the tremors intensified. The tunnel behind us caved in, the pulse of Nemoris faltering and stuttering into silence. We reached the fissure I had used to escape the ritual chamber, now widened by the collapse. Claire squeezed through first and I followed, emerging into the upper levels of the central hub. But Nemoris wasn't done with us yet. As we stumbled into the empty streets, the city began to collapse around us. Buildings groaned and split, the ground heaving as though in agony. The sky, once a dull, oppressive gray, rippled and tore open, revealing a churning void beyond. "We need to get to the train station," Claire shouted over the cacophony. We ran through the disintegrating streets, dodging falling debris and collapsing structures. The city's pulse had become a ragged, dying heartbeat, but it still fought to pull us back. Tendrils shot up from the ground, grasping at our legs, but we dodged and weaved, driven by desperation. Finally we saw it, the train station, its entrance cracked and half buried under rubble. We forced our way inside, sprinting for the platform. As we reached it, a train, a real, tangible train, was pulling in, its doors already open. Without hesitation we leapt aboard. The doors slid shut behind us and the train lurched into motion, pulling away from the collapsing nightmare of Nemoris. Through the windows I watched as the city shuddered, split, and imploded into itself, vanishing into the void. For the first time in what felt like forever, I exhaled. But Claire was staring at me, her expression pale and grim. "We're not safe yet," she whispered. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels against the track was oddly comforting, like a lullaby dragging me towards sleep after endless hours of terror. But the moment I let my head fall back against the seat, Claire's whispered warning echoed through my mind. "We're not safe yet." I snapped upright, scanning the dimly lit carriage. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows across the rows of empty seats. The windows showed only darkness, a void, an emptiness so complete it almost seemed to pull at my thoughts, threatening to unravel the fragile hope I clung to. Claire sat across from me, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of her seat. Her face, pale and drawn, reflected the haunted expression I was sure I wore myself. I forced my voice to steady. "What do you mean?" "We destroyed the core. The city collapsed. We made it out." She shook her head. "Nemoris isn't just a place. It's a state of being. It's not confined to the city, it's everywhere it touches, every soul it's consumed. We didn't kill it. We only wounded it." I stared at her, trying to comprehend the enormity of what she was saying. "So what's happening now?" Claire pointed toward the window, her voice a fragile whisper. "Look." Reluctantly, I turned to follow her gaze. At first, I saw nothing but the endless blackness rushing past the train. Then, faint shapes began to emerge, amorphous, shadowy forms pressing against the glass, their outlines barely discernible. Faces, so many faces, staring inward, their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. I recognized some of them. The people I had seen in Nemoris, the ones who had vanished. Even the faceless men from the train platform. They were all there watching. I recoiled, pressing back into my seat. "What are they?" "They're the lost," Claire said. "The ones Nemoris has fully consumed. They're trapped in the in-between, neither alive nor dead. And they're waiting for us." I could feel the train's motion subtly changing. The smooth, mechanical rhythm began to stutter, as if the track itself were shifting beneath us. The air in the carriage thickened, growing heavier with each breath I took. My skin prickled with an invisible static charge, and a low hum vibrated through the floor. Suddenly the train jolted violently, throwing me from my seat. Claire grabbed the backrest to steady herself, her knuckles white with strain. The lights flickered faster now, pulsing with the same erratic heartbeat I had felt beneath the city. The train wasn't moving forward anymore. It was circling. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the back of a seat as I swayed with the train's unnatural motion. "It's trying to bring us back," I said, panic rising like bile in my throat. Claire nodded grimly. "It's using the train as a conduit, a tether. If we stay on, it'll pull us back into Nemoris, or whatever remains of it." I glanced toward the far end of the carriage, where the door to the next car swayed open slightly with the train's lurching movement. Then we get off. There has to be a way out. She hesitated, then followed me as I staggered down the aisle toward the door. Beyond it, the next carriage stretched out in eerie silence, its seats eerily pristine as though untouched by human presence. But as we crossed the threshold, a deep groaning sound echoed through the train, like metal twisting, a leviathan stirring in its slumber. We pressed forward, weaving through the cars as the air grew colder, our breath misting in front of us. Shadows flitted at the edges of my vision, vanishing the moment I turned my head. The train's windows were no longer showing the void but something worse, images of Nemours, alive and thriving. Towering, flesh-like spires twisted into the sky, streets teeming with faceless denizens. It was as though we were moving not away from the city but deeper into its heart. At last, we reached a door marked with a faded emblem, an older train car, its wood-paneled walls and brass fixtures relics of a bygone era. Claire hesitated, her fingers brushing the handle. This isn't part of the train," she murmured. "It's older. It's a remnant." Before I could stop her, she pushed the door open and we stepped through. The carriage was filled with people, but none of them moved. They sat perfectly still, dressed in outdated clothes, faded suits, tattered dresses, faces frozen in expressions of terror and resignation. Their skin was pale and waxy, their eyes glassy and unfocused. As I moved closer, I realized with a shudder that they weren't breathing. They weren't alive. Claire's voice was barely audible. "They're the ones who tried to escape. Passengers on trains before us. They didn't make it." The realization hit me like a hammer. This wasn't a train to safety. It was a trap, a vessel designed to harvest those who resisted Nemours' pull. The city's influence extended even here, into the liminal spaces between reality and oblivion. "We need to get off now," I said, my voice hoarse with urgency. We turned, only to find the door behind us had vanished, replaced by a seamless wall of dark, polished wood. The train lurched again, and the air filled with the low, resonant hum of countless voices murmuring in unison. "They're waking up," Claire whispered. The seated figures stirred, their heads turning toward us, their glassy eyes snapping into focus. One by one they rose from their seats, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. Their mouths stretched open, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and a chorus of inhuman wails filled the carriage. I grabbed Claire's arm, dragging her toward the far end of the car, where a faint outline of a door shimmered like a mirage. The figures closed in, their movements gaining speed and coordination. Hands grasped at our clothes, pulling, clawing, trying to drag us down into the sea of dead. With a final, desperate lunge, we burst through the shimmering door and tumbled into blinding light. When I opened my eyes, we were no longer on the train. We lay sprawled on a cracked concrete platform beneath a gray sky. Around us stretched an abandoned railway station, choked with weeds and rusting tracks. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant caw of a solitary crow. Claire groaned, sitting up beside me. Where are we?" I looked around, trying to get my bearings. There was no sign of the train, no sign of Nemours' looming skyline. Only desolation and decay. A faded sign nearby bore a name that was half erased by time and grime. It read, Nemours Junction. Claire's face twisted in horror. "It's still here. We didn't escape. We just moved." The realization settled over me like a shroud. The city wasn't a place you could leave. It was a parasite that moved with you, reshaping reality to trap its victims. Nemours was everywhere and nowhere, a shifting labyrinth that extended far beyond any map. But as despair threatened to consume me, I noticed something, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air. The ground beneath us trembled and cracks spider-webbed across the platform. The sky above churned as though the fabric of this false world was weakening. Claire gripped my arm, her voice trembling but resolute. "It's not over. But it's breaking." I looked at her, a flicker of determination igniting in my chest. "Then we find the real way out. We keep fighting." The platform groaned beneath us as we stood together, ready to face whatever horrors Nemours had left to throw at us. And in the distance, faint but unmistakable, we heard a train whistle.